The morning light fell gently over the fields of Laura family farms, touching the soil with the same quiet devotion it always had. But on this day, the land did not answer back. Somewhere between the low hum of machinery and the stillness of dawn, a life built on patience, faith, and family fractured beyond repair. Laura Wilson stood at the center of a place once defined by growth, now marked by absence, by a silence so loud it pressed against the chest. For years, the farm had been a refuge, a living symbol of resilience and love shared with millions who watched from afar. Yet behind the warm smiles and pastoral calm, something had been breaking slowly, invisibly, like roots rotting beneath healthy soil. Tragedy did not arrive all at once. It crept in, disguised as exhaustion, responsibility, and unspoken fear. What happens when a life dedicated to nurturing others is confronted with a loss it cannot mend? When the land that once healed becomes a reminder of everything taken away. This is not just the story of a farm or of public success. It is the story of a woman forced to survive the unthinkable and to decide whether pain would end her story or transform it forever. Morning arrived at Laura family farms without ceremony. The sun lifted itself slowly over the horizon, spilling pale gold across the fields, illuminating rows of soil that had known decades of care. The air was still, unnaturally so, as if the land itself was holding its breath. No laughter drifted from the farmhouse. No familiar rhythm of footsteps broke the quiet. What remained was silence, thick, heavy, and absolute. Laura Wilson walked through the farm as though she were moving inside a dream she could not wake from. Her boots pressed into the dirt, yet she barely felt the ground beneath her. Every structure stood exactly where it always had, preserved in its order, untouched by the catastrophe that had torn through her life. Fences were upright. Equipment was neatly stored. The farm looked whole. She was not. Grief did not arrive with tears. It arrived as numbness, as a suspension of time. Laura's mind moved backward and forward all at once, replaying fragments she had never known would become sacred. A half-finished conversation, a glance exchanged without meaning, now weighted with regret. Moments that once passed unnoticed returned with cruel clarity, demanding to be felt all at once. Her chest tightened, not with pain alone, but with the unbearable realization that nothing could be revisited, corrected, or undone. The farm had always been a place of purpose. Every task had meaning. Every season promised renewal. Now, that logic collapsed. Laura stood in spaces once filled with shared labor and quiet joy, and felt an unfamiliar dissonance. How could the world remain functional when something so vital had been taken from it? The land continued its cycles, indifferent to human suffering, and that indifference cut deeper than chaos ever could. Beyond the fences, unseen but ever present, was the weight of being watched. Millions knew Laura as a symbol of steadiness, of grounded resilience. They saw her through screens, framed by sunsets and open fields, a woman who seemed unbreakable. What they could not see were the fractures spreading beneath the surface. Alone, Laura wondered whether strength was something she still possessed, or merely a performance she had perfected over time. The idea of vulnerability felt foreign, almost dangerous, in a life built on reliability. As the day faded, dusk settled over the fields, washing the farm in muted blues and shadows. Laura stopped at the edge of the land, where the rows dissolved into open space. The wind stirred lightly, carrying the scent of earth and memory. She stood there for a long time, unmoving, listening to the quiet she could no longer escape. In that stillness, a question pressed against her more forcefully than grief itself. This place, once her refuge, now held every reminder of what she had lost. Could she remain where every step reopened the wound? Or would survival require the unthinkable, walking away from the life she had built and the land that had shaped her entire identity? The fields offered no answer, only silence. Long before Laura Wilson became a woman defined by endurance, she was a child shaped by quiet necessity. Mornings began early, not with indulgence, but with expectation. The land did not wait for readiness, it demanded presence. Small hands learned the weight of tools, the language of soil, the discipline of finishing what was started. In that world, love was rarely spoken aloud. It was shown through effort, through reliability, through showing up no matter how tired the body felt. Responsibility arrived before innocence had time to settle. Laura learned quickly that hesitation slowed others down, that asking for help disrupted a rhythm already stretched thin. Fear was something to be swallowed, not examined. Tears were inconvenient. Strength was praised when it was quiet. The farm taught her how to endure, but it also taught her how to disappear inside that endurance. Family bonds were real, deeply rooted, but heavy with unspoken rules. Dependability became her currency. Adults leaned on her steadiness. Siblings trusted her certainty. Admiration followed, but so did isolation. Laura became the one who could be counted on, the one who did not falter, the one who absorbed strain without complaint. Inside, exhaustion gathered slowly, unnoticed, mistaken for normalcy. Psychologically, worth and usefulness fused into a single idea. To rest felt indulgent. To struggle openly felt weak. Productivity was not just a habit, it was identity. The land rewarded persistence with visible beauty, fields responding to care, growth following labor. That feedback loop reinforced a belief Laura carried silently into adulthood. If something was breaking, it meant she had not worked hard enough yet. But beneath that belief lay a fragile truth. By learning to manage everything alone, Laura never learned how to be held. Vulnerability was unfamiliar territory, uncharted and avoided. The same patterns that built resilience also narrowed her emotional range, leaving little room for grief, confusion, or collapse. She learned to survive storms, not to seek shelter from them. As the chapter closes, the foundation of Laura's future comes into focus. These early lessons would one day allow her to build something extraordinary, admired for its authenticity and strength. Yet they also left her exposed, emotionally unarmed, when life demanded more than endurance alone. The question lingers in the soil of her past, unresolved and quietly ominous. Did the very roots that taught her how to stand also make it impossible for her to bend without breaking? Laura Family Farms began without strategy or ambition. There was no plan for an audience, no intention to be seen. A camera was simply turned on to capture moments that already existed. The steady rhythm of chores at dawn, the soft creak of barn doors, the quiet satisfaction of work completed by sunset. What viewers found was not spectacle, but sincerity. In a world accelerating endlessly forward, Laura offered stillness. And people stayed. The audience grew slowly at first, then all at once. Messages arrived from strangers who spoke of comfort, of calm found in her fields, of healing discovered through watching a life rooted in simplicity. Laura became something larger than herself, a symbol of grounding, of reliability, of a world that still made sense. She carried that role with grace, unaware of the cost accumulating beneath it. With visibility came expectation. Each day was no longer just a day, it was content. The farm was no longer only a livelihood, it was a stage. Laura felt the subtle shift as moments once lived privately became framed, curated, preserved. Viewers wanted consistency, reassurance, the same version of her they had come to trust. Change felt risky. Vulnerability felt dangerous. Behind the scenes, exhaustion deepened. The farm asked everything of her body. The audience asked everything of her spirit. There was no pause between the two. Laura learned to move through days efficiently, quietly, suppressing doubt the way she always had. Grief, when it surfaced, was postponed. Weakness was deferred. Silence became a necessary skill. The psychological paradox sharpened with time. Millions watched her, yet she had never felt more alone. Praise arrived constantly, but it skimmed the surface, never touching the parts of her that felt unseen. Laura feared disappointing the people who found refuge in her life. She feared that revealing struggle would fracture the image they relied on. Slowly, joy shifted from something felt to something performed. Smiles lingered just long enough for the camera. Relief was postponed until nightfall. Internally, something began to erode. The version of herself admired by strangers felt increasingly distant from the woman living inside the farmhouse. Laura sensed the separation growing, but she did not know how to bridge it. The farm, once a sanctuary, now demanded perpetual presence. Rest felt like abandonment. Stepping back felt like betrayal. In quiet moments, often alone after the day's work was done, Laura confronted a realization she did not allow to fully form. The life so many cherished was costing her pieces of herself she could not replace. The pace was unsustainable. The silence she relied on was no longer protective, it was corrosive. As the chapter draws to a close, a fragile tension settles over the story. Laura continues forward, carrying admiration, responsibility, and exhaustion in equal measure. But beneath the surface, something delicate has begun to crack, and the loss waiting ahead will not be softened by love, by success, or by the gaze of millions watching from afar. The tragedy did not announce itself with noise. It arrived without warning, without mercy, and afterward there was only aftermath, a hollowed-out quiet that settled over Laura Wilson's life and refused to lift. What had been lost could not be named lightly, could not be reframed or softened. It was intimate, it was final, and it split her world cleanly into before and after. The farm did not pause to acknowledge the rupture. Dawn still arrived. Animals still needed tending. Crops still followed their unforgiving timetable. That continuity felt cruel. Each task Laura completed became a reminder that the world was moving forward without what she had lost. The land that once steadied her now emphasized absence, its indifference echoing her own internal disbelief. Guilt followed quickly, invasive and relentless. Laura's mind turned against itself, replaying decisions with surgical precision. Every delay became suspect. Every moment of distraction felt like betrayal. She interrogated her past with a severity she would never apply to anyone else, convinced that presence could have altered fate, that vigilance might have prevented the unpreventable. The questions had no answers, only weight. Fear replaced routine. Nights stretched into endless hours, sleep fragmented by intrusive memories and imagined revisions of reality. The dark felt louder than the day. Laura withdrew first from the public, then from connection itself. Messages went unanswered. The camera remained off. Silence, once a refuge, became isolation. Psychologically, she entered survival mode. Movements became efficient, mechanical. She functioned because stopping felt dangerous. Emotion was compartmentalized, sealed away so she could continue breathing. Those who watched from afar might have mistaken her absence for strength, for privacy chosen with intention. In truth, Laura was hollowing out, protecting herself by becoming smaller inside. The expectations placed upon her, resilience, continuity, inspiration, now felt unbearable. They pressed against grief that refused to be inspirational. She wondered whether continuing was an act of courage or a refusal to confront what had happened. The farm stood as both obligation and accusation. Every familiar path led back to memory. Every task carried echoes of what was no longer there. As days passed, the weight did not lessen. It compounded. The effort required to remain composed grew unsustainable. Laura began to recognize the danger of her silence, not as peace, but as erasure. Grief, left unspoken, did not fade. It sharpened. One evening, alone in the farmhouse, the stillness finally broke her. The walls felt too close, the air too heavy. She sat surrounded by the life she had built, and understood with terrifying clarity that enduring quietly was no longer possible. The strategies that had carried her through childhood, through success, through pressure, had failed her here. In that moment, a truth emerged, stark and unavoidable. Something had to change. Not later, not gradually. Grief was no longer something she could manage in isolation. If she continued as she was, silent, functional, hollow, she would disappear beneath the weight of it all. The farmhouse offered no guidance, only the echo of her own breath, and the understanding that survival now required a choice she had been avoiding. The pace of life does not suddenly soften after loss. It slows unevenly, in fragments. For Laura Wilson, healing does not arrive as hope or optimism, but as permission, the quiet allowance to stop pretending she is intact. There are days when forward movement feels impossible, and for the first time, she does not punish herself for that stillness. Mourning becomes something she inhabits rather than resists. Answers are no longer demanded. Survival, she learns, is not about returning to who she was before everything broke. The farm remains, unchanged in structure, yet altered in meaning. Where it once stood as proof of resilience, it now becomes a landscape of memory. Each field holds echoes, not only of pain, but of love that once moved freely through these spaces. Laura walks more slowly now. She allows herself to feel the weight of absence without immediately turning it into strength. The land no longer asks her to endure. It simply exists alongside her. For the first time, Laura begins to speak grief instead of burying it. Not loudly, not publicly at first, but honestly. Words emerge that had been locked away by habit and fear. Vulnerability, once mistaken for failure, becomes a form of connection, first inward, then outward. She learns that asking for help does not dismantle her identity, it reshapes it. Psychologically, a shift takes root. Laura's sense of purpose loosens from productivity alone. Endurance is no longer the measure of worth. Rest becomes necessary. Presence becomes enough. She allows herself to imagine a life that includes joy without performance, meaning without constant output. The audience that once felt distant now feels secondary to the life she must continue living. Legacy, in this quiet phase, takes on a different definition. It is no longer tied to views, admiration, or public success. It exists in emotional truth, in choosing to live fully without denying pain. Laura's journey becomes a testament not to overcoming tragedy, but to carrying it without letting it erase love. As the chapter closes, Laura walks the fields once more. The soil is familiar beneath her feet, but the woman moving through it is changed. The future remains unwritten, undefined, and uncertain. Yet she stands grounded within that uncertainty, no longer running from it. The final question lingers softly, without demand or urgency. It is not whether Laura will thrive again, but how pain reshapes what thriving truly means, and what grows when ruin is finally allowed to rest.